And we are live on the Flagship Podcast. I am Rich, and he is Joe, and there is no better way to start this episode of the Flagship Podcast than the iconic theme music from the Midnight Express, as we are going to talk about the life and career of Dennis Condrey, who passed away just 6 days ago at age 76. So gotta play all-time great theme song, all-time great, just an all-time great song. And then just an unbelievable theme song, and obviously lives on today with FTR's AEW theme, which is basic, just a complete ripoff of that song, which is fine. It's a great song.
An homage.
And it's an homage, a very nice homage.
I would not say ripoff. I would say homage.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. It's not. It doesn't try to be the same thing, but
they're not hiding it that it's
no.
You know, so
I bet ripoff complimentary. Ripoff parentheses complimentary.
Yeah, that's fair. I was thinking about this after Dennis Condrey passed away, and I knew that we would have to do the requisite obituary, which we love to do, but we also don't want to do, right? It's always these weird feelings like you don't want any of these people to pass away. Certainly in the manner that Dennis Condrey passed away, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But we love doing these shows, and the listeners love them. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, and you could help me think this through, when Bobby Eaton passed away, we started the show exactly the same with that exact song. That
did I? I don't even remember doing that, but I probably did. Yeah,
we did. Not only that, I'm almost positive. If you could look up the date that Bobby Eaton died very quickly, producer.
I got you. Yeah.
I'm almost positive that when we opened the show with the Bobby Eaton obituary on the week of
August 4th, 2021.
So that would be almost 5 years ago at this point. I think that was the first full-scale, what has become known as the flagship obituary that we ever did. I know that we talked about people who passed away prior to that and maybe did versions of what we do today. But I think we really dove in deep and did the first what has become known as our sort of trademark obituary. I think it was for Bobby Eaton. And I think prior to that, for whatever reason, we didn't have the confidence to do those kinds of shows. And it was silly, but we just didn't. And while we talked about other people who passed away, we never, I think
talk about the life
beginning with Bobby Eaton is when we decided, okay, when these big names in wrestling die, we're going to talk about them, whether it takes 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, or in the case of Sabu, the entire fucking show.
Yeah.
We're just going to do it, however long it takes. And we're going to talk about these careers of these men. I don't think there's been a woman yet, oddly enough, that have, in some cases, given years off their life to entertain us. And I think Bobby Eaton was the first one.
That timeline does make sense, and I think one of the big reasons why, and I'm trying to double check this, and that's why some people in the listening live may have heard a brief blip right there, as I'm trying to figure out exactly when we first started these. And I think you're right, and I think one of the big reasons why we did Bobby Eaton and why we felt confident enough doing Bobby Eaton is, and I was trying to match up the timelines, I think we had just recently had done the Midnight Express versus the original Midnight Express deep dive not that long after that. So I think it was like we were fully entrenched in all things Midnights and all things Bobby Eaton, and then he had passed away not that long after. I'm trying to double check and see if that timeline's right.
On top of a career that we were very familiar with, we also just studied it.
Yes. And that's what I'm trying to figure out if that timeline, because in my head, that's kind of what I think is why we finally had the confidence to just say, you know what, let's just roll it out. I mean, we know everything we can possibly know about Bobby Eaton and the Midnights.
All right, I got to cut you off. No, the deep dive was on September 14th, 2022.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So we just had the confidence in Bobby Eaton, I guess, to know that we.
I think prior to Bobby Eaton, the lack of confidence came from, I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have every single fact correct and not screw anything up. And while it's important to have facts correct, especially when you're eulogizing somebody, I think that our audience, as much as getting the timelines right and having the facts correct, they also, what they like about when we do this is just our opinions and our takes on the wrestlers, and just what we thought of these people as fans. And it's if we screw up if we make a minor mistake on a date or a title change or when somebody jumped to a certain territory, it's not that big a deal. And I think that we thought previously, oh man, if we screw something up, people are gonna be mad at us, and that's not the case. It's we can always look things up on the fly, and I think it's more important just to have the conversation about someone's career rather than worry about, was that title change in 1985 or was it in 1986? It's not that big a deal. We could always correct ourselves a few moments later, and we always do. And without that pressure, I think we've been much more comfortable just doing these.
Yeah, and I think the idea that I always try to come across with, and it's a big reason why there's been certain people that have passed away, and everyone's like, "Oh, you guys are going to do an obituary," and I'm like, I don't know, and I'll like talk to you about it. There's certain people we don't. I mean, it's not every wrestler that passes away we're going to do one of these obituaries for, because there's a lot of wrestlers that I don't really have that much to say about them, or I'm not passionate, and I think that is the key. Is we can get a fact or two wrong, we can get a title change wrong, or we can get a what day or what year somebody switched territories or whatever. We can get that wrong as long as we have passion about the person we're talking about, and passion and real, like, whatever. Yeah, just having that sort of the knowledge base, the baseline knowledge, and then the passion is, I think, the combination that we need to really hit on these. And it's okay if some of that knowledge is not perfect, and as long as the passion is there. And that's where I think everybody that we have done one of these long form obituaries for has kind of fit that mold. And someone like an Antonio Inoki, I remember when he passed away, people were like, oh man, you guys are going to lay out a lot for Antonio Inoki. And I remember telling people, like, I wouldn't really expect that. And then you ended up not even being there for that show.
I was off that week. I don't know what it was for, but I wasn't even on the show that week, and it was planned ahead of time. But that's a pretty good example, because I was never really a fan of Inoki, and I mean, you have to have something to say, and there also has to be, look, I also wouldn't do one if I knew next to nothing. I mean, we've skipped ones where we both were like, hey, do you know anything about this guy? And it's like, nope, well, I don't either. So if it's just going to be, if 90% of this is going to be based on crash research, who wants to listen to that? Do you know what I mean? Like, anyone could do that.
Yeah, you don't want to hear us read a Wikipedia entry and go, oh, hey, Joe, in 1977, he did this. It's like, yeah, that's terrible.
So yeah, and you're always gonna have holes. You're always gonna have dark spots in what you know. And if it's not someone I'm super familiar with, I'm not gonna do it. Yeah, you guys, I'm sure, would rather listen to somebody who's familiar with the subject. But it's someone saying we did Bundy. I do recall doing King Kong Bundy. That's true. So I don't know when he died.
Let me see when the Bundy show would have been.
We did a pretty substantial one for him too. The other one, too, that everybody seemed to really love was Paul Orndorff, and he died on July 12th, 2021.
Maybe that was it then.
That was before Eaton?
What did I say Eaton was? You just said, what was Orndorff?
Orndorff was July 12th, 2021.
It would have been a month before the Bobby Eaton one.
Okay, so, Orndorff was definitely in the mold of what we do now.
Yes. So sorry, Bobby 100%. Eaton. You're not special, kid. We did it for... I don't remember Bundy. I remember talking about King Kong Bundy, but I don't remember necessarily having a very long... I'm trying to look for that one right now.
It was 2019.
Okay.
We definitely did a segment on Bundy. There's no
yeah. I know what you're saying. Like, the spiritual beginning of this thing that we're talking about here is a little different.
Yeah. I mean, we've done segments on a lot of people, but I mean, the we're going to open the show, and if there's no time for New Japan Cup, tough shit. That style, I think, started, I guess, with Orndorff then, not with Eaton. Because Orndorff has...
Because I do remember that Orndorff one being real long and real detailed. Yeah. So that's probably the one that started. And then maybe we got our sea legs under us, and then Eaton. I do recall there was like and I have to look at it exactly. I feel like there was a bunch right in a row. I feel like we were doing one of these shows.
God, it was so many.
I mean, for like five out of the last 8 weeks or whatever, we were doing these kind of shows for guys.
I remember Kamala. I remember Black Bart. I remember just been.
I remember Lanny Poffo, another one pretty recently, or a couple years ago that we did.
Yeah, I mean, there's been plenty, but Dennis Condrey is definitely, just like Bobby Eaton. It'd be very similar, not only because their careers are so intertwined for, in very obvious ways. But you're dealing with two very similar wrestlers in from the standpoint of they're both in the conversation for the greatest tag team wrestler to ever step in a ring. I don't know where someone would fall if you were ranking people, who else you would include. But both Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey would have to be considered two of the greatest tag team workers of all time, without question, even outside of the tag team that they had with each other. When you look at Bobby Eaton, obviously he had the tag team with Stan Lane. He had the tag team with Coco Ware, that's gonna come up in the conversation we're about to have. And then Dennis Condrey with the various versions of the Midnight Express, and then his teams in the 70s.
Right. With Phil
Hickerson and Dr. D, David Schultz, and all that before the Midnight Express was even, a thought. He was already, and I guess we're starting there. I mean, that's the beginning of his career. Dennis Condrey had a whole ass career in the 1970s before the Midnight Express was even formed in 1980. Like you mentioned with Hickerson and David Schultz. Don Carson was another person he teamed with in that pre-Midnight Express era. And when he was bouncing back and forth, primarily with Hickerson in those days, the Bicentennial Kings.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
They were working for Goulas before the split, and then the Jarrett split happens, and they bounce back and forth from working with Goulas to working with Jarrett, and then going over to Knoxville to work Southeastern, which would later become Continental, where Condrey would work a lot in the ensuing years, which gets confused. This always gets confusing because there's Southeastern, which became Continental later, and then there's the Memphis territory that most people are familiar with, which was called Continental Wrestling Association
right.
for a long time. So, we'll try to keep it straight as best we can. But really, in those years in the 70s, once he became a top guy, and it didn't take him long. I mean, by 1975 or so, this was a legitimate main event wrestler because these were tag team territories.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the big tag teams were working on top, and he was working on top with Phil Hickerson. And I know some people, when they think of Phil Hickerson, they think of late career Phil Hickerson when he was doing the PY Chuhai fake Japanese.
Oh God,
gimmick.
I always forget that that's him.
Different time. Don't judge.
Can't do that anymore.
The fake Japanese doing like the Japanese stereotypes, managed
PY
by
Chuya,
managed by Tojo Yamamoto,
Yeah.
and I guess that makes it okay because Tojo. Wait, is Tojo a Hawaiian
No, I
Japanese?
believe he is. I believe he is a Hawaiian Japanese. Let me clarify. Indeed, he is a Hawaiian Japanese man. So
none of it was okay. None of it was okay.
Well, no, probably not. No.
If he was at least endorsed and managed by an authentic Japanese man, then maybe you could say, all right, well, the Japanese guy doesn't care. But no, this is one of those fake Hawaiian Japanese guys. But yeah, so not that, this was Phil Hickerson in his prime. This was Phil Hickerson. And there is some Phil Hickerson, Dennis Condrey footage out there.
I was going to ask. I haven't seen a whole lot of it, and that's a huge blind spot for me. But is it a blind spot for everybody, or because
I mean, if you just punch it into YouTube, you get 2 or 3 matches. I mean, you're not getting 50 results, and that's just YouTube. Of course, if you scrape deeper into the internet, I'm sure you can find some more. But just a basic search of YouTube, if you do it right now, you're going to get clips. You're going to get a match or two of Hickerson and Condrey. And are you doing that?
I'm doing it right now. Yeah,
okay.
I don't know if you hear my clicking going on right now. Yeah, it's Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson versus Dombrowski. Joe Dombrowski. Thank you, brother. Almost all comes from him. So Joe Dombrowski's Pro Wrestling Library is where
that Joe Dombrowski.
Yeah, that one. And there's also the aforementioned Tojo Yamamoto. It's Phil Hickerson and Dennis Condrey. The Wrestling Channel as well. Bill Dundee and Tojo Yamamoto. I'm watching that. With Phil Hickerson and Dennis Condrey. So yeah, there's a little bit. There's a little bit there.
There's a little bit. There's enough to get a feel, I think, is the point, without having to dig super deep and hit up your sketchy friends for their Google Drives and whatnot. But which I'm sure there's more out there of those guys, because there's a lot of tape of the places that they were at. Because again, they would bounce back and forth between, Jarrett, Goulas. They'd go to Knoxville and work for the Fullers. and they would stay fresh. I mean, they never stayed anywhere longer than 6 months to a year, even if that. And that's just how it was then. And we talk about that all the time, how it's so beneficial to just stay fresh and not burn out in front of an audience. And then you always have the comeback ready. Like you come back to the territory you left 6 months earlier and you feel fresh again. And you can do new things with whoever's in the territory at that time. And Hickerson left wrestling for about a half a decade. He had some kind of injury. I don't remember what it was. And, that's when Condrey was teaming with guys like David Schultz and he had other partners then too. I'm trying to think, like Don Carson, he teamed with briefly. The David Schultz team, they were sent up to the Maritimes at one point, and I don't know how much David Schultz is like a complete lunatic, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So David Schultz is like a very unstable and was always someone who
almost always unstable. Yeah.
Basically, the best way I could describe how people describe David Schultz was like if Gabe Kidd was for real. Like that's like David
right, Gabe
Schultz.
Kidd who never turns off the Gabe Kiddness.
Right. But he's like Gabe Kidd, but it's not a gimmick. Like that was David Schultz. I still don't know if when he shot the ceiling on Tuesday Night Titans and Vince McMahon goes nuts, I still don't know if that's true.
Man, I don't know. Vince is either a very good actor or I don't know. But
you son of a bitch, you son of a bitch.
That wasn't really McMahon's voice at that time. You know what I mean? Like,
no, he had never done that before.
Yeah,
and
we're not talking about this. Isn't like Attitude Era Vince McMahon. This is like, welcome to World Wrestling Federation. I'm Vince McMahon. Like very buttoned up and very basic. Very monotone at times. Vince McMahon. And yeah, they're doing a Tuesday Night Titans, and Schultz has a gun, and he shoots the ceiling, and Vince just goes, "What are you doing, you son of a bitch?" And it's just like, whoa. I don't know, man. I don't know.
I still don't know.
I don't think so. I feel like that had to be a shoot, because that is not like that Vince of that era to do that.
No, that wasn't him at all. Like, you never heard him lose his cool like that or anything. But to finish my story, they got sent up from whoever they were working for, sent them up to the Maritimes for one of them summer tours. And within a week, Schultz gets in a fight. And they got to like skip off in the middle of the night to the airport to fly back to fucking Knoxville or wherever the fuck it was that they were, based in with whatever talent trade was going on. So could you imagine Dennis Condrey and David Schultz getting in bar fights with fans in the Maritimes?
Yes, I can.
Like the summer of '79. Like that is just the absolute grimiest shit. And
Dennis Condrey, who at that time looked like he was 47 years old, even though he was 28.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because the thing about Dennis Condrey and the fact that no matter, when he was 26, he looked 50, is he always had the beard or the goatee. He always had the facial hair. And the reason that he did that, oddly enough, ironically enough, is because he was always a heel. Okay? And without the facial hair, he had big cheeks. He had a baby face. He didn't look like a heel unless he had the facial hair. So that's why he wore a beard all of those years, because he was afraid that he didn't look ferocious or tough enough without the facial hair, which, was a trick that a lot of guys used back then and even today. But it's funny because in not wanting to look less in not wanting to look younger than he really was because of his babyface features and his chubby cheeks and everything, he ended up looking twice as old as he really was.
Yeah.
It worked in the other direction. And the fact that he didn't have any kind of chiseled physique and he kind of had a dad bod. Now, listen, there are points in his career later on where he got a little out of shape. But in his prime, I wouldn't say he was out of shape, but he didn't have a gym body.
No, but those guys at that time really didn't. I mean, if you don't watch a lot of old territories, that's not what like tough guys looked like. Like I talked about this when I was doing Tour of the Territories and talking about Mid-South, and like Bob Sweetan was a guy I kept bringing up. Now Bob Sweetan, you wouldn't consider that man in shape, right? Because he's like got a big barrel chest and he's kind of chubby or whatever. Yeah. But in the late 70s and the early 80s, like that's what a tough guy looked like. A tough guy wasn't a guy who looked like Batista, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't a guy who had like a chiseled physique and all that stuff. A tough guy was a guy who looked like he got done with his day labor job and went to a bar and fought you. You're like, that's the kind of guy you're not going to want to meet in a bar fight, is that big barrel-chested guy who's seen some shit, who's got, thick-ass forearms and thick barrel chest, and that is like the idea of what a tough guy looked like. And now Vince McMahon kind of put that whole thing on its, flipped it on its head, and in the WWF, a tough guy and a big guy was like, chiseled out of granite, Hulk Hogan. But that's really not, especially, if you go watch like strongman competitions of those years, or arm wrestling competitions, or anything with like strength in the late 70s and early 80s, they're guys that look like that. They're not guys that have abs and chiseled, toned physiques. They're guys with big chests and big forearms and just like your uncle, like your strong uncle. That's kind of the vibe that most of the, that's what the territories wanted to present as like the tough guys. That's what the tough guys looked like. It wasn't the dudes that had gigantic biceps or whatever. So, and that kind of changed, by the mid 80s and the advent of steroids or whatever, and WWF, becoming as popular as it did. Like, that's then what became like the de facto look for, oh, that guy's a tough guy, or that guy's strong. Look at him. He looks like the Warlord or whatever. And yeah, really, like 1982, it's like Junkyard Dog and Bob Sweetan and those guys that look like that. That's kind of what the tough guys of the era looked like.
The thing with Dennis Condrey is he's a big guy. When you go back and watch this shit, he's almost always the biggest guy in the ring.
Yeah, I'm watching this match here with him and Hickerson versus, let's see, it is Kevin Sullivan. I don't know if it's that Kevin Sullivan. I can't really tell.
It is.
Oh, it is that Kevin Sullivan and Ted Allen. And Hickerson and Condrey, oh my God, they look like monsters. It looks like Big John Studd and Andre the Giant in the ring there.
Now, to be fair, Kevin Sullivan's like 5'6".
Right. But like, again,
but look at Condrey. He's a big guy.
Big guy, wide shoulders, big body, like always had a big like, I think he was listed at 6 or 6'1" or whatever, but always was about 250, 255, 270, somewhere in that range. So he's a big, thick guy.
Yeah. Big, like, wide back, a big person. If he walked into a bar with normal people, he'd almost always be the biggest guy at 6'1", 250, 260 or whatever. And especially, in those southern territories where there were a lot of little guys, there were a lot of smaller guys in the territories that he worked. So that kind of enhanced his size as well. Bobby Eaton was deceptively large. Mm-hmm. That's something that we talked about a lot before, where he was a deceptively tall guy and thick guy. But Condrey he had a solid build. He just, a guy who looked like someone you wouldn't want to fuck with. And so anyway, he had a whole career from basically the mid 70s on, where he was a main event dude, bouncing from Southern Territory to Southern Territory until he lands in Southeastern again in 1980. And that's where he hooks up with Randy Rose for the first time. And they are feuding with, obviously, the Armstrongs and a very young Brad Armstrong and the Masked Shadow. And they're exchanging the tag team titles, and then they do an angle where the Shadow unmasks as Norvell Austin and turns on Brad Armstrong, joining Condrey and Randy Rose, and then they dubbed themselves the Midnight Express, which Condrey always claimed was not directly after the movie of the same name. It was more because they all liked sports cars and they liked drinking, late into the night. And so they were legitimate friends who liked to party together, the three of them. And they just called themselves the Midnight Express. So that's where the genesis of the team and the name came from in 1980 in Southeastern. And you mentioned the deep dive we did a few years ago, where the deep dive is actually the Midnight Express versus the original Midnight Express feud from NWA television at the end of 1987 and the start of 1988. But we go into the history and the formation of the Midnight Express. And if you weren't subscribed then, or you want to listen to it again, or didn't even know that we did it, it's right there under the deep dive tag, or just search those keywords. And we go deep into all of this history, probably a lot of the ground we're going to cover here, but
I'll try to put it in the show notes too. If I forget, I apologize, but I will try to put it in the show notes, because I think if you like this discussion and want to learn even more, About the Midnights, because we went real deep into the entire history of the Midnight Express tag team and stable, really, and then that feud, and we're going to talk about a lot of it there, but we talked about the matches too, and really got we got deep into it. It's called the deep dive, but I really recommend listening to that if you enjoy this discussion we're about to have.
Yeah, so that threesome bounced back and forth between Southeastern and Memphis, the same territories that he was bouncing back and forth with Hickerson from basically 80 to 83 until late 83 when Condrey heads off to Mid-South. Actually, I don't want to skip too far ahead. There was a point in 83 where Condrey and Norvell Austin went to Memphis, but Randy Rose stayed behind in Southeastern. And Rose then took on Honky Tonk Wayne Ferris and Ron Starr as his new partners in the Midnight Express. So you had the Midnight Express still going on in Southeastern, built around Randy Rose, Wayne Ferris, and Ron Starr. And then you had Dennis Condrey and Norvell Austin, who at that time were in Memphis as part of the first family with Jimmy Hart for a brief period of time there. There was almost two versions of the Midnight Express in those two neighboring territories.
Yeah.
But
it's really wild, that they're running like concurrently with each other. This other, Midnight Express running at the exact same time.
But that version, the Randy Rose, Wayne Ferris, Ron Starr version, was short-lived. It only was a few months. Although we did manage to dig up some promos and stuff for the deep dive, which were incredible to watch. If you've never seen Wayne Ferris full-on WWE Honky Tonk Man when he was doing the primitive version of the gimmick where he was still essentially doing an Elvis impersonation, but as more of a tough guy and less of a chicken shit heel.
Yeah.
It was more like he had the mutton chops and he was clearly patterned after an Elvis or remember Chikara had a guy doing that gimmick towards the end? The hell was that guy's name who was doing like the mutton chop 50s?
What the hell was that dude's name?
Remember they had one?
Yeah.
It was played for Chikara Comedy, obviously, but I can't remember what that guy's name was. If the Swink's in the chat, he surely knows. But but that version of, Honky Tonk Ferris or Wayne Ferris, a very different, like dangerous feeling version of what would later become the chicken shit heel you would see when he was, the full blown honky tonk man.
Right. The one that took a powder in every single title defense for,
which was great in its own way too. Yeah. I mean, that was a great gimmick in its own way too.
To hell with it. Just throw
his hands and just leave.
Just go back.
Take the count out, grab that title belt.
I love it. Yeah, it's good.
Grab Peggy Sue and get the fuck out of there, So anyway, what was I saying? Oh, so that what happened was they only lasted a few months and they lost a loser leave town. I think it was a 6-man cage match probably against the fucking Armstrongs. I'm not looking at it right now and I don't quite remember. And so Ferris and Starr went back to Calgary where they were the Memphis Mafia. And not long after that is when Ferris got the call from the WWF and he brought that routine to the McMahon territory in 1986, and the rest is history. But just a few years before that, he was technically a member of the Midnight Express. The way, I don't know how you see it. The way I see it is if Dennis Condrey, Randy Rose, or Bobby Eaton are involved, it's a genuine version of the Midnight Express.
Correct. I agree. Yeah. Particularly the first two. If Randy Rose and Condrey are involved, it's the Midnight Express. And when you add Eaton to that, of course. But if Randy Eaton Rose and Condrey is involved, it's true. It works.
If any one of those three guys are in any kind of tag team or stable and they're calling themselves the Midnight Express, that's the Midnight Express to me. Now, when you start getting into Bodacious Bart and
fuck off with that shit can go. Yeah, no, Bob Holly and frick that shit's no. that does not count. Yeah, Bart Gunn and Bob Holly does not count as the Midnight Express.
Yeah, but if one of those three guys is involved, then that to me is an authentic version.
People might say that if Cornette's involved, but I don't. I think
it predated Cornette.
Exactly.
You don't have to have Cornette.
Right. I'm 100% with you. It does not have to have Cornette, but it has to have Condrey, Rose, or Eaton involved.
Because as we just laid out, Cornette was involved with a combination that I don't consider real Midnight Express when they with Bob Holly and Bart Gunn. Cornette was involved with that, and that's not real. He would even tell you that. Cornette would say that wasn't really the Midnight Express. So I wouldn't include Cornette in that. To me, it's Condrey, Rose, and Eaton. One of those has to be involved. So to me, that Randy Rose, Wayne Ferris, Ron Starr version was an authentic version of the Midnight Express. How can you say it's not if Randy Rose, who originated the fucking team, that's who he chose as his guys? So at any rate, that was it really for Rose for the next 8 years in the gimmick. And then it was, or in the team, because as we said, Condrey, he left for Mid-South in 1983. And then we had the infamous trade between Watts and Jarrett between Mid-South and Memphis. And Bobby Eaton was part of that trade with Jim Cornette going from Memphis to Mid-South. And a bunch of wrestlers went from Mid-South to Memphis. Jim Neidhart, Rick Rude. There were you'll hear different versions of that talent trade.
Yeah, if you go listen to the Tour of the Territories, right? Because we actually watched that episode. The episode where the new Midnight Express debuted is actually an episode that we watched. So I went through and I tried to get as many people in the trade as possible. I'm trying to see if I could find my notes from that episode, because there different versions of it exist or whatever. But yeah, essentially like the big names going from Mid-South to Memphis were like Neidhart and Rick Rude were the big names that went there. And the ones that went from Memphis to Mid-South, I mean, holy shit. A very one-sided trade, if you ask me, because they got a hell of a lot of talent coming on over from Memphis to Mid-South, because that's when you get Eaton, you get the Rock and Rolls. Coco Ware came over as well for a bit. It was
Cornette,
Bill Dundee,
Cornette,
Bill Dundee came over as a booker, and it is night and fucking day between the TV that Dundee was booking with those guys and what was happening in Mid-South before that. Because I watched a lot of Mid-South last year for Tour of the Territories, and a lot of it was like, I don't know, this is okay, but I'm not really vibing with it. And then I watched this November '83 episode with these guys and Coco and Bill Dundee, running the show, and it was like, whoa, this is a night and day difference between this territory, what's happened once you this talent influx that they had, and then also the booking influx of Dundee.
So that infamous talent trade was the genesis of that infamous story where Jerry Jarrett went down to Mid-South to look around and scout and decide how they were going to construct this trade.
Right. And Bill Watts asked them to come down. For people that don't know the history of this, Bill Watts, the territory was starting to, peter out a little bit, and Bill said, hey,
Watts
you guys
was looking for fresh ideas.
Right. What a novel idea. Call somebody else and say, hey, look, business is down a little bit. I need to find a new idea, a fresh idea. So he calls, the guys from Memphis, and Jerry Jarrett and Bill Dundee come by, and he says, hey, what can I do to freshen this thing up? And now you can take it from here.
Yeah, so they're in the locker room or whatever, and Jarrett's checking out the wares. He's like, oh, this Jim Neidhart looks like a brick shit head. This Rick Rude might be able to do something for me. And he turns to Watts and he says, "Where's the blowjobs?" And Bill Watts is taken aback by this, and he's like, "Well, listen, pal, if that's what you're looking for, you got to handle that on your own. I don't help out with that sort of thing." And Jarrett was like, "Oh, no. That's a term we use in Memphis. It's a slang term for where's your young, good-looking baby faces. We call them blowjobs because it brings the women to the building." Again, different time, don't judge.
Right.
He just was casually using the wrestling lingo that they used in Tennessee that Bill Watts had never heard before. And Bill Watts took it as, this guy wants me to fucking get him prostitutes or something, and I'm not down with that, But then when that all got worked out and the misunderstanding was untied, that's where Jarrett had the idea of, hey, I've got this guy, Bobby Eaton, and I've got these other, you don't have like good looking young junior heavyweights. Like I could send you some of that. And you can send me what I don't have. These big guys like Jim Neidhart and Rick Rude, and that we can fill, the market inefficiency in each of our territories and help each other out that way. And because Bill Watts notoriously loved bigger wrestlers. He loved the heavyweights. That was his thing, and he kind of had a blind spot for the smaller guys. So anyway, Condrey's already there, and he's just working as a single or whatever the fuck. And Eaton and Cornette come down, and Watts puts them together. He says, I'm going to put you guys together as a package, and you guys got to come up with a name. And Eaton and Cornette didn't really have any ideas, but Dennis Condrey, who was fresh off of working as a member of the Midnight Express for the last 3 years, he goes, I don't know, why don't we just call ourselves the Midnight Express? He didn't think much of it. It's just the name that he'd been using anyway. So they didn't want to be bothered with brainstorming for a name. They were like, who fucking cares what you call us, right? So Condrey just used something that was familiar to him that he had already been using. And Cornette and Eaton kind of just shrugged their shoulders and said, it's all right with us. And Phil Watts was like, all right, it's fine with me.
And nobody knew. And the other thing about the territories these days is nobody knew what the fuck. I mean, they had always done stuff in Southeast and Memphis or whatever.
Yeah, they never came to Mid-South.
Yeah, so in Louisiana, they didn't know what the fuck the Midnight Express was ever. And that's another great part of the territory, Aaron. A great part of the lack of information is you can just go to the same territory, do the same thing over or different territories, and do the same idea over and over again because the people in New Orleans don't know what the fuck you did in Memphis, and the people in Memphis have no idea what you did in Knoxville. You know what I mean? So you could really, you could play it up pretty well, and you can have like one or two ideas and do it across the entire country, over and over again. It's a nice gimmick, nice gig.
Yeah, because no version of the Midnights had ever been in Mid-South, so it was all new to them, the name and everything. So, and then the rest is history. They became major stars. Obviously, the chemistry between the three of them was just ridiculously off the charts. So it's just something that worked. In the history of wrestling, there's been thousands upon thousands of tag teams that were put together where the chemistry just didn't work and they fade away. And even if it's two charismatic wrestlers who are good workers, for whatever reason, it just doesn't click. These three guys obviously clicked at the highest possible level. They're arguably the greatest American tag team of all time. And it all started in Mid-South, and it's the first time that they crossed paths with the Rock and Roll Express. And they drew a shit ton of money with the Rock and Roll Express in Mid-South, and that was the seeds of a rivalry that would last well into the 2000s on convention shows and nostalgia shows and independent shows in the South, where as long as those guys could get into a ring and bump, and Ricky Morton still gets into the ring and bumps to this day, you were going to get some kind of version of the Midnights versus the Rock and Roll Express, and people were still going to pay money to see it. And it all started in 1984 in Mid-South.
Yeah.
So,
I do want to know before we move on is that if you're ever looking for, and there's a lot of this on YouTube as well, the Midnight Express, their first big feud in Mid-South was with Magnum TA and Mr. Wrestling 2, and there's a lot of really good stuff if you want to see that. There's lots of footage of that. You can see a lot of the matches if you want to see a young Magnum TA working with the Midnights, and you can watch the Midnights kind of figure things out and figure out their chemistry in that in a lot of those matches with Magnum TA and Mr. Wrestling. But that's a really good feud to check out as well, and a really cool ending where Mr. Wrestling 2 turns on Magnum TA and helps that doesn't help the Midnights win the title. He just goes, here you go, beat his ass if you want, I don't really care, that type of thing. But it's fun to watch an early Magnum TA as he's kind of growing and developing his skills, as well as the Midnights kind of figuring out what they wanted to be and how they were going to get that chemistry. And you could see the chemistry just growing and growing and growing with every single match that they have. And and then the Rock and Rolls come in, and then we're off to the races here.
Magnum TA had to be 21, 22 years old.
Oh, God, yeah. I'm trying to think, because this was like late 83, early 84.
What year was he born?
He was born in 1959. Holy shit, yeah.
So, he's 24.
Okay. Still.
A little older.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember, wasn't his accident like when he was 26 or something like that? It was like,
it's
I know he looks like he was 45 with the big mustache, and just everybody looked older then, and more masculine in those days for whatever reason. But he was like 26 when his career ended or something like that. And that would have been 86 or 87, 86. So that's just a few years, because we're talking 83.
Yeah.
So
October 86. October 86 is when his crash was.
Yeah, so it would have been like 22, 23 with this Magnum TA. And that, again, kind of put him on the map too. But so they're making a ton of money in Mid-South, and they know they've got a winner here. And Condrey is getting in Cornette's ear, and he's telling them, he's like, look, we got to get to Crockett. because Dusty's taking over the book. They're going to, they got Ric Flair. The Road Warriors are going to work with the Road Warriors. The Rock and Roll Express, I think, may have left before they did and gone to Crockett. They did, in fact. The Rock and Roll Express were there before the Midnight Express, because we're going to get to that. And Condrey knew, he had the foresight. He said, we're making good money here, but we can crush it with Crockett. They're going to try to go head-to-head with McMahon and all this. So he kind of had the vision. But they got sent to Texas first, and they went to World Class. And they went in, with optimism, because they were coming off, World Class was coming off a hot run.
Yeah,
a couple years earlier. And they're like, all right, none of them had really ever worked there before. And that's where they first crossed paths with the Fantastics, another one of their career rivals. That was in World Class. And there are tons, I shouldn't say tons, but there's plenty of Fantastics Midnight stuff on tape in great quality. Versus the Fantastics. There's that great episode of TV where it's the Fantastics versus the Midnights. It's Shawn Michaels doing job duty to, I think, the one-man gang. And then I can't remember what the third match is, but it's one of the greatest 1 hours of wrestling television, that I have ever seen in terms of a 1 hour wrestling television show. And there's a great Fantastics Midnights match on that. Can't remember the exact date. Might have been October. Maybe October.
I'll try to get it for you here. I know the episode you're talking about. It's when the network first started. That was one of the first episodes I watched of World Class, because I remember hearing about how awesome that episode of TV was. So when we all got access to World Class's archives, I was like, I got to find this thing out right away. I'll try to find the date for you, but I know exactly what you're talking about. It's Shawn Michaels, SEAN.
Yeah.
Shawn Michaels.
Yeah. So they did a lot of cool stuff in Texas with the Fantastics and everything, but it was a horrible time for Condrey and the team personally, because they weren't making any money. They didn't like working there. The territory was clearly on the slow decline and on the way down. There's the famous story that Cornette likes to tell, where they were doing these tiny spot shows, sometimes in bars, and they would go with a limited crew. So the opener would be the Fantastics versus the Midnights, and then there'd be like one or two other matches, and then the main event would be a captain's match a singles match between one of the Fantastics and one of the Midnights. And what they would do is, to keep their bodies fresh or whatever, and just to keep their minds sane, is they would rotate it. One night it would be Bobby Fulton versus Bobby Eaton. The next night would be Tommy Rogers versus Dennis Condrey, so on and so forth. But these shows paid horribly, and the infamous story is, I think, Condrey got this payoff of $63 one time from one of those shows, $50 for the tag match and $13 for the singles match, and they're basically like, we got to get the fuck out of here because we're not making any money, and Crockett's going to blow up, and we're going to miss the boat on that. So the good thing is, as far as the footage and everything, and as wrestling fans, the vast majority of their work in that territory was with the Fantastics, and it's fucking awesome. So there's a lot of great footage of the Midnights there, because they're working with such a great team. So
that it was taped. I don't know when it aired. It was January 11th, 1985. But that is the episode that you're talking about. It's Kerry Von Erich versus Chris Adams, Kelly Kaninsky versus Buck Zumhoff, Rip Oliver versus Terry Daniels, Billy. Is this the right?
No, that's the whole taping.
That's the whole taping, right? Taping. Okay, the episode. Okay, here's the episode. Is Shawn Michaels versus the One Man Gang, like you said. I'm trying to find the exact. I can't find the whole episode.
It's only like 3 matches.
Yeah, I forget exactly what the whole episode is, but yeah, it is highlighted by the Midnights beating the Fantastics to win the American titles in the main event.
Obviously, molten hot crowd like always. I mean,
you want to talk about a blowjob tag team? There are few teams blowjobbed as much as the Fantastics did. Even in that era where people went nuts for the Von Erichs, people went almost as nuts for the Fantastics. Like, those guys couldn't get to the ring without women just kissing them. Like, it took them forever. We talked about it when we anytime we've watched for this series, we watched old, and the Rock and Rolls would have the same issue where some of these teams couldn't get to the fucking ring because the fans, and you'd have to have these security guards, these big giant security guards throwing 12-year-old girls out of the way to be like, they gotta get to the ring, stop kissing them. But hey, you know what? You want to get paid? Got to be a good old blowjob tag team. And yeah, the Fantastics were perfect at it.
Yeah, I mean, and there were so many teams put together in that era trying to bite off of the fabulous ones, right? Because they were the first team of that type. Even the Rock and Roll Express, to some degree, are a derivative of that. Obviously, the Fantastics are a direct rip-off of the fabulous ones. But you had the fantastic ones, Terry Taylor and, oh, shit. Who the fuck was it?
Oh, the fantastic ones. I think it was Tommy Rich. Yeah.
And the same thing with the bow ties, just didn't work. 'Cause again,
right. Then you had the rock and roll RPMs when you're trying to rip off the rock and rolls. And it was just every territory
had one. Southern Rockers, Steve Dahl and Rex King.
It was Bobby Fulton and Terry Taylor. Bobby Fulton and Terry Taylor was the fantastic ones, actually.
Yeah, and I think Terry Taylor also tried it with Tommy Rich. If I'm not mistaken, they also had a team that didn't. I get confused. There were so many of them.
There was hundreds of ripoffs.
Group of guys. There was one too. I think they tried it with Brian Adias from Dallas. They teamed him with one of those guys in another territory, and he recognized right away that it was never going to work, and he just left town and went back to fucking Texas. But he kept the tights. And like when his tights change in Texas, that's the signal that he came back from fucking Memphis or whatever and abandoned the fucking blowjob tag team they tried with him. But yeah, the Fantastics and the Midnights from that era. It's just it's such great stuff. But they wanted to get out, and they wanted to. Condrey in particular was pushing to get into Crockett because he saw that as the place to make the most money. That wasn't WWF, although that would come into play a little bit later in the story too. And the thing with Condrey, circling back to him, since that's who we're talking about, he was such the perfect foil and the perfect dichotomy to these teams like the Rock and Roll Express and the Fantastics, because as we noted, he was a big, ugly guy. You know what I mean? Like he was the polar opposite of like Tommy Rogers. And he was such a great worker. Like when you watch Dennis Condrey work, I mean, if you want to talk about just being great at the fundamentals, but it wasn't just that. I mean, he could throw bombs too. And he could throw big bombs, but it was really the fundamental, the way he would throw strikes and punches and lay everything in and just really look like he was putting a beating on somebody.
Be careful. Be careful if you watch Midnight's matches this week. You listen to this show and then you get inspired to watch Midnight's matches. It's one of those things that you talked about. Alan Cunahan did this not too long ago, where he was watching old wrestling and just being like, nobody works like this anymore. This doesn't this sort of attention to detail and just basic fundamentals just does not exist anymore. And yeah, I've watched probably 50 or so Midnight's matches this week in anticipation of this show, and I'm just like, God damn it. It just doesn't, like, I watched Dynamite yesterday and I was just like, nobody on the show works even like a fraction of the fundamentals that these two dudes have.
They're great in their own way, some of the guys now.
Oh yeah.
But they don't, like Dennis Condrey is the kind of wrestler. He is almost the poster boy of the kind of wrestler who will ruin this shit for you if you watch too much of him. And
Ole's another one that does it. Ole Anderson is another one where I'm like, God damn it. This doesn't exist anymore.
Like Darius Martin is never going to be as good. And listen, Rich, we're not those guys.
No. We're not stuck in the mud at all. It just is what it is.
It just is what it is. We're not those guys. Okay. But they just, it's different now. And you watch guys like Ole is a perfect one. We talked about this when we eulogized Ole. Ole and Dennis Condrey are like the perfect examples, because they also have looks that wouldn't even get them near a TV promotion today. That's the other reason it's so striking. Because you watch Ole Anderson, who's just this middle-aged looking guy he's round, he's balding, doesn't bother to shave his head to just fucking cut to the chase. He just allows himself to have George Costanza's fucking haircut. But when the bell rings, that motherfucker, you feel like he's putting a beating on this jobber or whoever he's in the ring with. And Condrey the same way, especially so though. Condrey, again, a bigger guy. In there with like Tommy Rogers, who's 5'8", 220, not even maybe listed 220. He's probably 20.
Oh no, I don't know.
5'5", maybe at his most steroid peak, he was 200 or so. But you get the idea. In there with Ricky Morton, who's a tiny dude and never juiced. And Tommy Rogers, who was a tiny dude until he juiced. Like, and it's like the stiffness and just the snugness of Condrey's work just comes through tenfold because you have this huge man putting this fucking beating on this 5'8" guy. You know, so the opponents that he had really exemplified his working style. And, Eaton was a little flashier. You know, he'd do the top rope leg drop and all of that. But he was a big guy, too, who knew how to lay it in and looked like he was working stiff when he really wasn't and all of those things. So, anyway, they wanted to get to Crockett, and they eventually did in 85.
85. They got there. You know what? Honestly, they got there at the perfect time. Like, it had to have gone. They got there right as it was really getting hot. So it almost worked out that it took them a couple more months to get there because they get there. There's no better time to jump into Crockett than when they did.
Yeah, the problem was the Rock and Roll Express beat them there and were already well ingrained into like mainline stuff because they were feuding with the Russians over the tag team titles. So what Dusty was doing, he's like, I'm absolutely going to put you with the Rock and Roll Express.
Yeah.
I can't do it now because they're in the middle of a program with the Russians. They're trading the titles back and forth. So what he did was, not only did he not put them together, he kept them apart. He was booking the Rock and Roll Express in the Carolinas. He was booking, if you go back and look at the Midnight Express, they were booked in Georgia. They were doing like the spot shows in Columbus, Ohio, and Wildwood, New Jersey, and places like that. And he was literally keeping them apart. They weren't even on the same shows together yet because Dusty wanted to save that shit for the right time. And then eventually, obviously, by 86 or by the end of 85.
Yeah, late 85. 85, yeah.
Yeah, he redid the Midnight Rock and Roll stuff that was done first in Mid-South, which had a proven drawing record as well. And look, that was just, we talk about this promotion all the time. To me, it's one of the most rewatchable eras of any territory or promotion in pro wrestling history. Jim Crockett Promotions from when Dusty takes over, really till when Dusty gets fired for doing the blood angle on TV, which would play into something we're going to talk about with Condrey very heavily. Really, you can measure it from there, from when Dusty takes over, kind of turns over the roster. A lot less Johnny Weavers and a lot more Magnum TAs and Tully. Well, Tully was there before Dusty, I think. But you get the idea. Yeah. More Midnight Express, more Rock and Roll Express, more, the Dusty crew.
Whatever you think.
The Russians.
When you close your eyes and you think of the peak of Jim Crockett Promotions, that's that roster. It's not the roster from 84. It's not the roster from 83. It's the roster from 1985, 86, 87. That's the roster, That's
what Dusty brought in, out with the Briscoes, out with Johnny Weaver, and some of those guys were fine, but they didn't fit the vibes of what Dusty was doing. And the Midnights were obviously a massive, massive part of that. And they reignited their feud with the Rock and Roll Express. They worked with, the Road Warriors, obviously, the famous scaffold match and all of that at Starrcade 86. So they had teams to work with. And Condrey was right. They were making more money than they ever made before. And they even got a call from Vince McMahon. They got the call from Vince McMahon, who brought them up to, was it Connecticut, I guess, or New York, or wherever it was? I don't remember the particulars of the story.
I forget where he called them, but yeah, he called them and they wanted to do a meeting and try to get him poach them from Crockett to come to the WWF.
Yeah, and the big pitch, as Cornette tells the story, the big pitch was the action figures. He kept touting the action figures, I guess because that part of the pitch worked with other talent, but they weren't particularly impressed with the action figure aspect of it. And
I could see how that would work because that's passive income, and you got to think at this time when if you're a wrestler, the only way you are making money is by working, making towns, right? Like there's no other. That's the only way you get a paycheck is you got to go to work. And now I could definitely see Vince saying, "Look, you're just going to get a check. All I need is your you and you'll get a check. You don't have to do a thing, and I'll pay you." Am I going to pay you what you earned from these action figures? Don't ask that question, but I could see how any level of passive income, selling that to any wrestler of the territory era, I could absolutely see them saying, "Oh God, even if it's $1,000 a month or whatever, I'll take it because I'm not getting $1,000 a month to do nothing, here on the territories. So I'm in. I could totally see that pitch working.
Yeah. So, but it didn't work on them.
No.
They weren't impressed with that part of it. And this is a case where I think Cornette just wasn't able to see. He didn't have a good vision of the future or what you were talking about, because as the way Cornette tells it is that they thought of themselves as these heels that grandmas in the front row wanted to fucking stab and who had to sneak out of the back of the fucking arena before the show ends so they wouldn't get attacked and all of this. And they're like, why would anybody want our action figures? So they didn't think they were going to make any money on merchandise and marketing and things like that, which was a total misread with the benefit of hindsight by Cornette and those guys. And the other thing that they talk about is they didn't really hear a lot of booking ideas from Vince. They heard a lot of, I'm going to make you rich and all this bluster and action figures and cartoons and all this. But what they were really looking to hear was, all right, here's what the ideas I have for you. We're going to put you in a 6-month program with, I don't know, fucking Hart Found, whoever the fuck was there at that time. Then we're going to do this. And then, maybe we'll turn you baby fit. No, there was none of that. It was just, I'm going to make you rich. And you've never been an action figure before. Right. And they weren't the kind of guys that were going to be taken by that. So they left the meeting with Vince unimpressed, and they stuck with Crockett.
Yeah, and it should be noted too, like, we know what happened in history, and we know obviously the WWF won the war and won everything, and everybody was. But if you were working, especially you working Crockett in '87. The WWF wasn't a sure thing. The WWF wasn't, this is going to be the thing that's going to take over the entire industry. Like Vince was running in the red for a long time. I mean, to get to where Vince got to run WrestleMania 1, he had to basically pay through the nose for all this talent, all this TV time, and it was shaky. It was more shaky than WWF history is never going to tell you that. Of course, Vince McMahon discovers Hulk Hogan and creates Hulkamania, and the rest is history. But it was way more touch and go there for a while. And now that's, again, that fact is kind of lost to history. And it was like, it was always going to be successful and it was always going to work. Like, yeah, they had, the ability. They certainly had a head start being in New York and Vince buying the territory for pennies on the dollar from his dad or whatever. And yeah, but there were aspects of Vince's takeover that, there's a couple things that, by WrestleMania 2, by the year after WrestleMania 1, WrestleMania 2, like, if you read the old observers, there's talk that Dave's having is like, yeah, the business is really slowing down and the houses aren't as much and Vince is really running in debt. And like, it was way, way, way more touch and go than you might think. So I could absolutely see the Midnight saying, yeah, we're not really seeing much from this guy. It's and you know what? We got a pretty good thing going in Crockett. So yeah, it's not worth, does it seem silly in hindsight to turn down Vince McMahon in the WWF in 1987? Yeah, probably, but it doesn't, it's that's not understanding exactly where WWF was in the hierarchy at that time. And no doubt territories were going out of business left and right, but there were still some strong territories, and Crockett being very, very strong at that time as well.
Yeah, and remember, this isn't even 87, because by 87, Condrey had quit. So you're talking even earlier than that. You're talking, I don't know when this meeting was, but I'm guessing it was in 86.
Yeah, and a lot of 86, again, like I said, if you want to go back to the old observers, like Dave talks a lot about how the, Titan Sports is, accumulating a lot of debt and the houses are getting a little small. And he even says, is Hulkamania maybe losing a little bit of its luster? Like, it had its run, and it's so funny in hindsight to think about it, but it makes sense. It's like Hulk's had his 2-year run and maybe it's over, like that's how top runs were for a while. And maybe, and I remember reading one observer from, maybe July or August of 86. And Dave's writing like, maybe it's time for Hulk to try to look at moving to another territory because he's starting to lose some, and all this seems insane in hindsight, obviously what would happen over the next couple of years. But they were still considered to just be another territory. They just happened to be a territory that was spending a shit ton of money to acquire talent and acquire TV. And of course, by WrestleMania 3 and then by, the year after and then the collapse of Crockett, like, no doubt Vince and WWF were, emerged as no doubt the winners in the war or whatever. But yeah, 86 is way more touch and go than you might think.
Yeah. So it would have been in 85 or 86 for sure, because in 87, Dennis Condrey just fucking disappears. And he doesn't tell anybody he's leaving. And he just fucking drops off the planet. And presumably, I think, there's a couple times he disappears. He disappears again. We're going to talk about two more times that he just up and fucking quit. He is the embodiment of the of that internet meme where it's just like, just quit, just get up and leave. It just, if you're not feeling something. And this was the first time he did that, and he left Cornette and Eaton high and dry in early '87. And I think Dusty was the one who picked Stan Lane, who was working in Florida at the time, to and Dusty, obviously, if it was Dusty, and I think it was, good job out of him, because he stepped right in and the chemistry remained the same. If they weren't as good with Stan Lane, they weren't far behind. I mean,
I think it's real close. Yeah, I think it's real close. It's a little bit of a different vibe because Stan Lane's a little bit more of a dynamic worker and a little faster, but
a little flashier.
Yeah, but it's pretty close. I think I prefer Condrey, but it's not that far off. It's really close. And if you said you prefer the Lane and Eaton, I wouldn't argue with you either.
Yeah, I mean, it was the version with Condrey was a little grittier. The version with Lane was a little flashier. But the chemistry was, again, just insane, and it worked from that standpoint. And it's funny because Cornette didn't put either of these teams together, yet both of them worked so great, right? Like, Bill Watts put the Condrey version together, and Dusty put the Stan Lane version together, and they both were phenomenal and two of the greatest teams of all time. Condrey, though, I think he may have been already living in Colorado by that point, and maybe he was just tired of the long trip. I know for a fact he was living in Colorado later when he quit the AWA, which we're going to get to. But whatever the reason was, and I don't even know if the reason's ever really, I think maybe he was just, fuck this, I'm tired of this. I want to go home.
I never found like a good reason why. I never found a good explanation for why he quit. I mean,
it's 15 years straight of living the fucking road life. And, when you think about his early career, I think it's interesting. He never really left that Tennessee area. He bounced between the three promotions that were right at each other's back doors. And, it's like guys from that era would say you didn't even necessarily have to move when you switched territories when you worked in those three places. So maybe he's just someone who the grind of Crockett got to him, because look at the other places he worked too. World class, you're working Texas. You're not randomly jaunting off to fucking Montana when you're working for, whereas with Crockett, like I said, they were working in it when they first came in Atlanta, but then they were doing spot shows in Ohio. They were doing spot shows in New Jersey.
Yeah, and that's a lot of guys talked about that at the time. You and I had this discussion. I forget who we were talking about. Maybe 6 months ago or a couple months ago, we were talking about one of the old territory guys. I forget who it was, but he just basically quit WWF because he was like, dude, I'm not flying from Sacramento to fucking Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, who was that?
You know what I'm talking about? It was Sacramento, too, is the town he mentioned. He was like, literally, I got on a plane, I went to Sacramento, and the next day I had to be in Columbus. And I was like, fuck this. And he just quit. He was just like, forget it. I'm going to go back to the territories where I can live in one place, drive to my town, and come home and go to bed. God, who was it? He said I could work these territories, and most times I could come back
sleep in my own bed.
I was someone from Portland, I want to say, but who...
I don't think it was Steve Regal.
No, maybe it was Steve Regal. No, you're right. It was Steve Regal. No, it was. It absolutely was. It was. I'm positive it was Steve Regal because Regal had that brief tenure in WWF, and
he did,
and he just bounced. No, it was absolutely Regal. It was 100% Regal because he was talking about how in a lot of the Texas and other territories, especially like you said, the southeastern territories, you could work a town and be in your own bed that night.
Yeah.
It'd be a long drive, and you might get in at 1 a.m. or whatever, but you could sleep in your own bed. And he said he did that WWF grind for a little bit, and he was just like, fuck this. Like, I'm not.
Plus, he wasn't getting pushed.
Right. I'm not going to get pushed, and I'm not getting pushed, and I'm on these flights. And so I could see like an old territory guy like Condrey who had been on the road for 20 straight years or 15 straight years or whatever.
Yeah.
Getting on a plane and going to New Jersey, and then getting on a plane and then going to this town and being like, I don't need this shit.
It was Regal because I remember he said he stayed long enough to get to buy his house. And then I think he retired. I think he largely just retired after, because that was like 89. He didn't wrestle much after that.
Right.
He just did. So I think, and he said, yes, I was a job guy, but I made more money than I ever made in my life. And I just stuck around to pay off my house or down payment, whatever it was, to buy his house. And then he just quit. That was it. And he just he bought his house and then got a real job. So you're right. Yeah, it was Regal. So he leaves, and the Midnight Express carries on with with Stan Lane, and he hooks up with Vern. You know what? I bet you he was living in Colorado because Vern was running Denver, and Vern was running some of those mountain, like Las Vegas and Denver, and maybe he saw that as right, and maybe he saw that as better than running up and down, the Atlantic coast, because he was closer to home and all of that. So that may have been a factor. But when he went to the AWA, which was obviously not in great shape at that time, very similar to the state that Dallas was in when he went there. Like it wasn't 1989 AWA yet, but it was clearly past the peak. And that's where he was reunited with Randy Rose, and they reformed the Midnight Express under the tutelage this time of Paul E. Dangerously. So again, we have two concurrent versions of the Midnight Express at the same time in 1987 and 1988, with the Lane Eaton version and the original version of Condrey and Rose in the AWA, where they had matches with teams like the Midnight Rockers, and they were associated. Vern was associated with Memphis at that time, so they did a lot of stuff with Jerry Lawler and people like that. In fact, wasn't it the AWA Southern Tag Team titles that they? Oh no, that would have been earlier. That would have been a few years earlier when he was still in the territories. Where even the tag team titles in Memphis had the AWA name attached to them for a while, but that was an earlier era. But again, now, Vern's having a lot of trouble paying guys because his business is declining. And Condrey had a pay dispute. I think specifically Condrey, for whatever reason, had a pay dispute, or it may have been Rose. One of them had a pay dispute with Vern. And Condrey once again just fucked off and quit, and that was that. And the other two followed him though. Paul E. and Rose backed him up, and it was so abrupt that they had to take a television match. And we've covered this match a million times, I think. They had to take a television match that they filmed with the Midnight Rockers in Las Vegas that they won and successfully defended the tag team titles in, and do one of those Stanley Blackburn reversals of the decision, and to get the titles onto the Midnight Rockers, because the Midnight Express were not coming back to drop them because they had the pay dispute, and they quit the territory. So that match is on tape. It's all over the place, and the Midnight Express wins, but then they reverse the decision based on nonsense and give the titles to Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. So from there, Cornette pitches the idea to Dusty. Hey, look, Dennis is available. He's teaming with Randy Rose. Paulie's a talented guy. We could do this feud between the two Midnight Express teams. And that's when they came into the NWA as the original Midnight Express, which was confusing for a little kid like me who only knew of the Bobby Eaton versions of the team. I knew of Dennis Condrey, but I didn't know who Randy Rose was when I was fucking 10 years old or whatever it was. And I'm like, these guys I thought the heat was that they were calling themselves the original Midnight Express.
Right. And you're like, they aren't the Midnight Express. These guys are the Midnight Express. Yeah.
I thought that was the heat.
Right.
Like, I was like,
you didn't know your 1970s or your early 80s, I should say 1980s Southeastern history very well as a 9-year-old watching World Championship Wrestling on television. Yeah.
As a kid, I thought, Dennis Condrey got this new partner and this manager who's like similar to Cornette, and he's and they're like, that was the heat. I thought Condrey was being a dick by calling himself the original Midnight Express. I didn't know they really were the original Midnight Express, but I guess the adult fans would have realized that, or the smart fans, the insider fans. And it kicked off with that great angle where Stan Lane's having a singles match. Cornette is at the podium with Schiavone or Crockett or whoever the fuck it was. I think it was Schiavone. Or was it Crockett?
I forget. It may have been both of them, actually. But I don't remember the exacts. But yeah, this is what kicks everything off, and it's awesome.
So Schiavone's like, you have a phone call, Jim. And Jim's like, Jim, Stan Lane's in the ring having a match. I don't have time to take phone calls, and I'm like, no, you better take this one. So he's like, all right, fine, give me the phone. And Cornette's like, who is this? I ought to. Well, why don't you come down here then and just say it to my face, right? And he's just arguing with nobody on the phone, and they're not. It's this mystery, like we don't know who's on the other end of the phone, right? So he hangs up on the guy and he's blowing it off, but then the Midnights and Dangerously storm the set and they jump Cornette and they jump Stan Lane. And here's the thought that was put into this, Rich, because it was the singles match. Eaton wasn't at ringside. So they had the numbers. You see, this is the kind of thought that they often don't put into angles today. So then Eaton had to come running in to save them. But by then it was too late because they got overwhelmed. Then they overwhelmed Eaton. Cornette, of course, is wearing a white suit because, of course, he is. And Dangerously cold cocks him with the gigantic fucking brick cell phone. And Cornette does the blade job. Bleeds all over the white coat. They leave everybody laying. It's a classic angle. And then the next week is a classic angle, too, where Cornette comes out with the bloody coat.
Right. He's got the scar on his forehead, the big bandage, and he's just, the coat is still just stained with blood all through it, and it's on. At that point, it is fucking on.
He cuts this impassioned promo. So the Cornette version are the baby faces. The Paul Lee version are the heels. Even though they're right, they are the original Midnight Express.
Correct. They are justified in their heel, and a lot of good heels are justified in what they say. I do want to I want to circle back to the thing that you talked about, where the thought that was put into the angle, and that's another thing that people. I'm doing a Q&A right now for the Patreon, and hopefully you have that done in the next day or so. I got a lot of questions, so it's taking me a while to get through them. But somebody asked what would I change about modern wrestling, and care. Thought, care, effort is what I would change more than anything, because I feel like we don't do any of that anymore, because you pointed out perfectly, and I saw it so much when I was watching episodes for Tour of the Territories, and I see it so much anytime I watch old wrestling, but there always had to be a reason why if the heels were going to outnumber the baby faces and get the advantage on the baby faces and bloody the baby faces and destroy them, it had to make sense. It couldn't just be the heels came out and beat the fuck out of the baby faces, then walked up the ramp. And I always talk about today, every single angle today that you want to get heat is the heels running in the ring, or a heel runs into the ring, he beats up the baby face and he beats up the baby face and he beats up the baby face and he beats him up and he beats him up and he beats him up. And then the closing scene that we see is the heel walking up the ramp with his back to the video board with his hands in the air, and then a cut to the babyface bloodied or just on the mat destroyed or whatever, and you never see that in the Territory days. And the reason you don't is because it would make no fucking sense. Why would I ever cheer for the guy who just got his ass kicked? So it always there'd have to be numbers. There'd have to be a reason why nobody helped the babyface. There had to be a reason why the locker room didn't come out. There had to be a reason why the babyface's, tag team partner or manager didn't come out and help him. And almost all the time you would see, in Mid-South, anytime, JYD would be, get beaten up by somebody, Jim Duggan would run out, and almost within seconds, the heels would either go packing and get the hell out of there, or they would get their asses kicked by Jim Duggan. Because once Jim Duggan got in there, then it was 2-on-2, and the babyfaces, if it's two babyfaces versus two heels, the babyfaces should outpower, and that's why you would cheer for them, because they're, it's and that's when we had this discussion not that long ago on the show, and we were talking about MJF and can anybody be good heels anymore? And I said I don't think the problem is bad heels anymore. I think the problem is all the babyfaces suck these days, because all we ever see with the babyfaces is them getting their asses kicked constantly for heat, and they never feel tough, and they never look tough, and they never they never make the heels back down from them. They're always just getting their asses kicked until the pay-per-view, and then they win the match at the pay-per-view, and it's okay, well, but we just saw the guy get his ass kicked for 5 straight weeks. Why would we ever invest in this guy or think that he's cool? But that was not the case. So I always loved that this angle, it had to make sense. Why would Bobby Eaton not be there? Well, the reason he's not there is because it's a singles match. If it was a tag match and they attacked him, it probably wouldn't have worked, because the babyfaces would have been 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 with Cornette there as well. So you had to tell the story that they were 2-on-1 beating up Cornette, and then when they got Cornette down, it was 2-on-1 beating Stan Lane, and then by the time Bobby Eaton got out there, it didn't matter because Cornette and Stan Lane had already been destroyed. So then you can get the heat by having a 3-on-1 attack on Bobby Eaton, and that sort of care would never happen today. ever. It would just be the heels would come out and they would just beat the fuck out of Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane for 10 minutes and then walk up the ramp with their arms in the air.
Walk up backwards as the music plays.
Right. That's exactly how it happened. And we would cut to Jim Cornette writhing in pain and Bobby Eaton writhing in pain and Stan Lane writhing in pain. And we're supposed to say, yeah, I'm going to cheer for those guys, the guys that got their asses kicked. No, I'm going to cheer for the guys that kicked all the ass. Like, why would I not? And that is the big issue with wrestling today is the baby faces are fucking pussies and they get their asses killed. They get destroyed constantly for heat. But, you know, in this case, it made sense because, no, they didn't have their numbers and the heels had the advantage because they had the numbers advantage and they knew exactly when to attack at the exact right time.
Yeah, and the other thing that would have happened too is it would have taken Bobby Eaton much longer to come out, and it wouldn't be until his music played. Yeah, you know what I mean. Like his music would have to play.
He needs like the whole song, like half the song.
Right? Yeah. No, seriously. Like we're not fucking around. Like you'd have to get like 15 notes of the song first. Yeah, until it was then he would come out.
Right.
And he'd be in his gear for some reason, you know, and then you know, and then he would proceed, and then he'd probably beat all three of them up, right? Like he wouldn't even get overwhelmed and beaten up at that point. So look, it's just again, we are not those guys. Maybe we are those guys. We're not those guys.
We might be becoming those guys more and more. But
there are just so many things that were done better, you know. And this is
watch this angle. And this angle is readily available. I believe it used to be readily available on YouTube. I'm sure it still is. Watch this angle and tell us we're wrong. Tell us we're wrong.
Yeah,
I dare you.
And you know, as someone points out in the chat, even the commentary screaming Shivani, they don't work here. They don't work here because. To the people watching on TBS, these guys were tag team champions on ESPN a month earlier. You know what I mean? They saw them working in the AWA. So now the problem with this awesome feud on paper, and there was plenty of good stuff too in the course of it, was that Dusty, who was behind it 100%, gets fired. He has his thing where he does the blood and. TBS fires him. So
TBS says you can't do blood, and Dusty goes, "I got you. Okay, no problem." And then says, "All right, so what's going to happen is you're going to stab me with a spike.
You're going to put a spike in my eye and bloody me up."
Dusty, you can't do blood or anything violent. Got it. Okay. And then leaves that meeting to go to a booking meeting where he tells, you know, the Road Warriors, all right, so for heat, you're going to grab your spike and stab me in the eye. All right.
Right. But we'll make it black and white and we'll get away. We'll get away with it.
I'm sure they won't care. Because by this point, we should note that this is no longer Jim Crockett Promotions. This is now World Championship Wrestling because
we're getting professional around here at this point. So
we're owned by Turner now.
Crockett took back over after they fired Dusty. So this might still be Crockett at this point, but it's we're getting to where
that's okay. Scale? Yeah. We're still, but we're trying to button things up a little bit more.
Yeah, it's but because Crockett took over and he didn't know how to book. But the thing about Crockett was he admitted he didn't know how to book, you know, but he liked this angle because he liked Dennis Condrey from when he worked there previous, but he didn't like Randy Rose. And that's where things started to fall apart because Crockett didn't like the way Randy Rose worked. He didn't like the way Randy Rose looked. And he kept trying to replace him in the tag team. And Cornette kept trying to explain, no, it has to be Randy Rose because that's the original Midnight Express. If we don't have Randy Rose, they're not the original Midnight Express anymore. That's the whole point of the fucking feud. We cannot replace this guy. And Cornette had already let bygones be bygones with Condrey. Remember, he walked out on him and Eaton, and they didn't really have a relationship at that point. But the way Cornette saw it was, it's a good angle. It's going to make some money. And look, we have thrived since Dennis left, and Dennis is the one working places like Vern's Dying AWA. It's like, you know, let's just all make some money together, you know. But it was Crockett who didn't like Rose. But then they talked George Scott out of retirement to come book the company because he had booked it 5 years earlier, you know, or 84, 83, whenever it was. Maybe even the late 70s. He might have had a couple tenures.
He was late 70s, and then he was also the early 80s.
Yeah. So, you know, and we've talked about that George Scott booking tenure a million times. He was gone too long. He didn't understand the business anymore, who the stars were. And
can you imagine being out of booking for 4 years and now you don't understand the business? Imagine if you left wrestling in 2021 and came back in 2026. Like, it would probably not be that hard to pick right back up and be okay. But this happened to George Scott. It happened to Bill Watts too. Bill Watts, was out of the game for a while, and WCW in 1992 or whatever, brings in Bill Watts, and he's got no fucking clue what's going on. He doesn't understand at all. And he had just stopped booking like 3-4 years ago. And then WWF tried again with Bill Watts in 1995, and he was like completely lost again. So yeah, this is, in these days, being gone out of the game for 3 or 4 years meant you didn't know what the fuck was going on anymore. You were lost as to what was the hot in professional wrestling, where, yeah, tell me if you left in 2023 and came back here in 2026, you wouldn't be able to pick right back up.
It'd be a lot easier. Yeah. It'd be a lot easier. So anyway, George Scott comes in. Now, Crockett's already Crockett doesn't like the way Rose wrestles, and he's wary of Condrey because Condrey quit on him in 1987. It turns out George Scott had previous heat with Randy Rose, so he doesn't like Rose. He doesn't know who the Midnight Express are. He doesn't understand the feud to begin with because he's been out of wrestling so long. So this is just becoming a fucking disaster. And Condrey sees the writing on the wall. He's like, all right, well, these fucking guys, they don't like either one of us. So then they booked a loser leaves town match between, I think it was going to be all three versus all three with the managers involved as well. And Condrey knew, all right, they're going to get rid of either me or Rose. And then the one that's left is going to be a jobber. They're not going to use us well because they both have problems with both of us. So he split again before the pay-per-view. Mm-hmm. He didn't even stick around for the pay-per-view. He said, fuck that. I'm leaving because they're either going to beat me at the pay-per-view and I'm going to get fired anyway.
Chi-Town Rumble, by the way, February 1989 is the show.
Yeah. And if they don't beat me and fire me, if they decide I'm the one they're going to keep, I'm not going to have a team anymore. And I'm just going to be a singles wrestler and they're not going to do anything with me as a singles guy. So either way, I'm fucked and I'm leaving. And you know what? It turned out he was right, because what did they do with Randy Rose once they had the match at the pay-per-view? He stuck around for 6 months as a singles wrestler, and he was a television jobber. Television jobber. They literally did nothing. His push ceased instantly because they replaced Condrey with Jack Victory in the pay-per-view match. And then here's the thing. Rose gets pinned, but then they don't even bother firing Rose. They keep him around anyway, but he's just a job guy. He's just a TV job guy doing working random sporadic house shows and getting beat on TV. So Condrey had the right read. He knew what his fate was going to be if he stuck around, and he got the fuck out of there.
Didn't even get the payday. And this is in the pay-per-view payday era too. And he just said, fuck it. I don't care. You can have it. Yeah, I don't get, you can keep your goddamn money. Fuck you. I'm out. Yeah.
So for the third time in 18 months, he just walked out on his promotion when he saw the writing on the wall and it looked like shit was going sideways. He's just like, you know what? Fuck that. I'm going home. You got to respect it to some degree. He's not a man who, no notice. He just picks up and fucking goes. He's like, I'm out of here. But that really ended his major league career. He returned to what was left of Continental, but this was this is into the era after the Fullers had already gotten out. This was that, what the fuck was that guy's name who bought Continental for the final fucking time? The guy who,
shoot.
This was after,
because it's not that Continental, it's the other Continental, the Alabama Continental.
Well, it's the same promotion, but it was no longer being run by the Fullers. Let me see if I can find the guy. David Woods.
David Woods, I got it. Yeah, David Woods, yep.
So he went back to the David Woods version of Continental, which was, by 1989. I mean, that was a fun promotion. There's no
I
doubt
like
about
watching it, but yeah, it's as low rent as you could possibly be. I mean, it is, yeah, it's certainly not the Continental of old at all.
Yeah, and then he just bounced around the indies until really Midnight Express nostalgia became something that he can make money on, and then it was the convention circuit, nostalgia shows, Southern Indies, where they just milked the Midnight Express versus the Rock and Roll Express for every fucking dime you could get out of it. And by that point in time, it was the three of them. It would be Eaton, Condrey, and Lane with Jim Cornette a lot of the time at these conventions and whatnot, and different combinations of them teaming together. Until Stan Lane got sick of that shit and stopped doing it, and he didn't want to be in the public eye anymore. And Condrey just and Eaton just did it until their bodies couldn't do it anymore. And that really was that. And then he had that one appearance on Dynamite, or it may have been Collision. If it was it was with FTR.
It was with FTR. Yeah, I forget if it was Collision or Dynamite, but yeah.
Well, if it was FTR, it was probably Collision. I mean,
I think it was during that era.
I think it was when Punk was there too.
Yeah.
So that was his last time on TV when he popped up in AEW and it was Dax who set up the GoFundMe for his wife, because now I guess we should discuss the awful circumstances of the man's death. As told by Jim Cornette on his podcast this week, his wife was a nurse who was 9 days away from retirement. 9 days. And they were planning on spending time together. He had talked her into finally retiring. And he was 76, Condrey. I think his wife's a little younger, but no spring chicken, in her 60s maybe. And he would drop her off and pick her up from work, and he didn't show up to pick her up from work. Wasn't answering his phone, wasn't answering text messages. She calls the neighbor, sends the neighbor over there to see what's going on. Neighbor has a key, goes in the house, finds him laying on the floor in the hallway. He was still alive at that point, but he had a fall and he broke his neck. And he either died on the way to the hospital or at the hospital.
I think it was at the hospital. Yeah. He had like his spinal cord was severely injured. He was paralyzed and was not doing well at all so I think he got to the hospital and was alive still, and then passed away at the hospital.
Yeah.
Maybe it was at his home. I forget. It doesn't matter. It didn't. It wasn't long.
The fall
after.
killed him. Yeah. The fall killed him, and he broke his neck. Died of due to the injuries from the fall. Who knows how long he was laying there, and before the neighbor found him. And just a terrible story, because it's the wife had about a week and a half left to work, and that was going to be that. And now she is a widow, and then Dax set up the GoFundMe to try to help her out, obviously a little bit. And Dennis Condrey dead at the age of 76.
It's at $46,000 right now, so a little over. The goal is $55,000, so 85% of the way there to the goal.
Yeah, and either way, she gets the money, so it's not like I don't know if people understand how GoFundMe works, but it's they're not like you only got to 53.5.
97%. Too bad, Toots.
Send everybody their money back.
Right, Anonymous. Here's your $10,000 back. Yes, a recent top donation from Anonymous. A little 10K from Anonymous. So,
very good chance that's somebody in the wressling business.
I would guess,
obviously the FTR boys, Tony Khan was on the list the last time I checked it. There's tons of people donating to that. So 76 years old, Dennis Condrey, arguably the greatest tag team wrestler in the history of this thing. I mean, he's undoubtedly in the conversation. His work just jumps off the page when you watch him wrestle. There's no doubt about that. And every time he formed a new version of the Midnight Express or left the territory, it's like I always find it interesting how many tag teams formed in his wake. Where Randy Rose took on Ron Starr and Wayne Ferris to form another version of the Midnights, where Stan Lane joined the Midnights after he quit, where when he left to go to Mid-South, Norvell Austin stayed behind and formed the PYTs with Coco Ware. Right. And then they had a run for 3 or 4 years where they eventually circled back. They ended up in Mid-South with the Midnights. And both of those teams were having good runs concurrently for Bill Watts at one point. And then you go right down the line. He's a guy that was always, the number of tag team titles is in the, close to 100 total tag team titles that are just documented. Because so many of those territory title changes never got documented or were lost to history or whatnot. I think the Midnight Express alone held the Memphis tag team titles upwards of 30 times or something like that. But what's interesting is the two most famous versions of the Midnight Express, Condrey and Eaton and Lane both only held the NWA World Tag Team titles once. And I bet you a lot of people would get that wrong if you asked them how many times the Midnight Express held the NWA World Tag Team titles. And in fact, the Eaton and Lane version was a very short title reign. A very short title reign. They were more in the mix with the U.S. tag team titles at that time, which were kind of the work rate tag titles of the territory during the Lane Eaton era. And the Eaton Condrey team only held them, the NWA World Tag Team titles once as well under Crockett. So that might be surprising to people, but in terms of the different versions of the Midnights that worked in all the territories, just, and different tag team titles held by Condrey, which I referenced earlier. He held those Memphis tag team titles with Hickerson and all those guys, upwards of like 30 times. So just a great tag team wrestler, great wrestler, period. But one of the greatest tag team wrestlers of all time.
Absolutely. So, we always try to say if you want to try to watch stuff, and sometimes it's a little bit harder to recommend stuff, this is not one of those. This is a very easy. If you want to start with the deep dive that we have at flagshippatreon.com, I just looked. We had 16 videos, 16 matches that we watched, and 16, like, some of them were promos, some of them were matches or whatever. All but one are still available on YouTube. So the playlist that we had for that deep dive is still very available for you. So if you want, you could start there. And then it's really not that hard to type in Dennis Condrey or type in Midnight Express on YouTube. Now, you want to make sure that you're watching for Condrey purposes, you want to make sure you're watching the Condrey Midnight Express matches. But it's not hard to tell. You can just look at the years and follow kind of what we talked about in the timeline that we talked about, and you'll be able to tell the difference between the Condrey Midnight Express matches and the Stan Lane ones. But there's a lot. There's a ton to watch. You just pointed out the Hickerson stuff, and some of that is available as well. So not as big in numbers, but yeah, you could just type in Dennis Condrey into YouTube. You'll find a bunch, and type in Midnight Express into YouTube. You'll find a bunch. And then, of course, like I said, go listen to that deep dive at flagshippatreon.com. And yeah, 15 of the 16 videos we had laid out for you are still available, including the early promos. The first ever Midnight Express promo with Randy Rose and Condrey as they're trying to figure out the characters and figure out what they are, as well as the one with Wayne Ferris that we mentioned as well, where he's a very different honky-tonk man than what you're probably used to. So, yeah, it's really, really cool stuff, and there's just a ton to watch, and it's really, I can't say, you got to watch this match and this match and this match. Just hit play. Just watch it, right? Like, that's probably the best way to do it. It's, try to pick out what your favorite match of those guys are or whatever. I don't think it really works that way. It's just watch it. It's, it's all pretty fucking good is probably the best way to put it. I can't tell you I've watched a Midnight's rock and roll match or Midnight's fantastic match.
You're never going to be disappointed.
That was just okay.
I mean, these are some of the greatest tag team matches ever.
They set the stage for what tag team wrestling would be forever afterwards.
Yeah.
Everything in tag team wrestling changes once those guys switch the template up.
Yeah. And I guess we should mention too, like in the brief period after they quit the AWA and before they started the angle with Cornette and the boys, they stopped off in Windy City Wrestling, where they held the tag titles there. And I believe Cornette was booking Windy City Wrestling at that time, if I'm not mistaken.
Or Dangerously, do you mean?
Oh, I say Cornette.
You said Cornette.
Dangerously,
yeah. Heyman.
Dangerously, yeah. Heyman would have been booking Windy City Wrestling around that time. And, I think they were just biding their time until the time was right for Dusty to bring them in. And they worked a bunch of, they were pushed act in Windy City, which, and I know Heyman was using Bam Bam there at that time. And Windy City was running some of the bigger independent shows of that late 80s era while Heyman was booking it. And he used a lot of guys who he would use later in ECW during that time at Windy City as well.
Wish I was alive. I wish I was old enough to. I was alive, but I wish I was old enough to go to some of those shows. Yeah. Of course, missed me by a little bit. I was 2 during most of that era, so my dad was not taking me to Windy City wrestling shows, but I wish he was, because it's a really fun era to go back and watch and check out. And yeah, just you like you said, the big part about that is you could start to see Heyman's booking footprint and some of the trademarks that would lead into ECW once he got the book there.
He used a lot of guys that he had been booking in Continental with Gilbert, and he used a lot of guys that he would book later in ECW, even a lot of underneath guys. I think 911 he may have first crossed paths with him in Windy City, or definitely like the Motor City Madman for sure. Maybe not 911, but obviously he brought the Midnights there. But there's some interesting lineups if you can find the old Windy City wrestling lineups, particularly when Heyman was booking. One thing that has annoyed me in the aftermath of Dennis Condrey's death, it's gotten a lot of mainstream attention, which is good, but it's just this thing again, where when the mainstream sites get a hold of these deaths and it's WWE legend Dennis Condrey has passed away at 76. And that is so fucking annoying and straight up offensive to me. He never wrestled a single match in for Vince McMahon. Not one time. Not one match. He never made a dime off of Vince McMahon. I mean, I guess he worked maybe as a trainer for Cornette at one point when Cornette was running developmental. But as far as he never wrestled a match for WWE. And they always pull that shit. And it's so agitating to me, where I understand that they're synonymous with pro wrestling to a lot of people, or to most people, and all of that. But it's disrespectful because the man never fucking wrestled there. And it's annoying and just agitating to me as a wrestling fan when I have to read TMZ or whatever mainstream outlet it is.
Yeah, I saw Yahoo. I saw Yahoo had that, or people. Sorry, it was People that had it, and it said, Loverboy Dennis Condrey. It's a Dennis Loverboy Condrey, WWE legend and founding member of the Midnight Express, dies at 74.
Yeah, it
sucks.
Gross. It's just so fucking gross. It's not some tribalism thing. It's just it's incorrect.
It's just wrong. It's just fucking wrong. It's just not true.
You know, they aren't the entire industry. They just aren't. And I hate that shit. You know, it can't just be pro wrestling legend Dennis Condrey. Are they in the WWE Hall of Fame even? I don't even know the answer to that.
I'm sure the Midnights are. I don't know if, let me see. I don't know anything about the WWE Hall of Fame.
They might not even be in the WWE, not any version of the Midnights.
No, they have not. Wow. They have not.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I could totally see McMahon when he was running things not wanting to put Cornette in or give Cornette a mic.
Oh, this has got to be good. Let me click this link. It says, Bully Ray has no doubt that Midnight Express belong in the WWE Hall of Fame.
Oh, great. Thanks, Bully.
Who cares about the WWE Hall of Fame?
Yeah.
Okay. I despise when guys and gals have it. This is Bully talking. I'm not going to do the Bully voice because my Bully voice is just Vince Russo, so you don't have to hear that.
I despise
when guys and gals have earned the right to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and then they're not when they're living, but then the WWE decides to induct them when they're dead. What's the fucking point? The Midnight Express. Let's talk about the most famous version of the Midnight Express, which is Condrey and Eden, along with Jim Cornette. There's no doubt that they should be in the WWE Hall of Fame and should have been in the WWE Hall of Fame a long time ago just for their contributions to tag team wrestling.
How many versions of the Midnight Express can I name better than the Dudleys? Probably at least 4.
4 for sure. Bodacious. You know what? I'm going to draw the line at Bodacious Bart and Bombastic Bob or whatever the fuck. Yeah, that I will concede that the Dudleys are better than the new Midnight Express. So,
but they are not better than Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson. I will not go.
No.
So there's another team. Now I'm up to 101.
To add to the mix, yeah. The WWE. I'll never forget the WWE Hall of like any does it make you just when people have earnest discussions about the WWE Hall of Fame? I'm like, what are you doing? Like this week, when it's like Psycho Sid and Bad News Brown are going into the WWE Hall of Fame, and it's like they should have inducted them when they were alive, and it's like, first off, Bad News Brown would have said fuck you about getting it. Like, he didn't want to go to the WWE Hall of Fame. He fucking hated Vince McMahon. He would have said fuck off. I'm not doing that shit. And it's like, who cares? I mean, just earnest discussions about the WWE Hall of Fame blow my mind, but sure, fine, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know who's in it. I don't pay any attention to it. It doesn't mean anything. But I mean, the Midnight Express aren't in. I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah, right.
It's like,
if you need to know how much of a sham it is, the idea that they're not when you were like, are they? I was like, of course. Like, I'm sure the Stan Lane, Bobby Eaton. No version of the Midnights are in. So just we're done here.
Yeah,
we're done here.
Yeah, So. Yeah, that's I got anything else to add on Dennis Condrey?
I really don't. Yeah, it's just I hope we did it justice, and I hope we at least enticed you if you've only seen a little bit of Midnight Express, a little bit of Dennis Condrey, or seen none of it. I hope we have enticed you to go and seek it out and like listen to that deep dive that we did. And hopefully, like I said, I'll try to put the link in the show notes. But that was a great show. We did like I just checked 2.5 hours about that feud, and like I said, the playlist that comes with that deep dive. You get so many of those videos are still available too, which is really cool. Because sometimes I go and look at these old deep dives and it's like shit. Like 2 of the 25 videos we have are available still, so just forget it. Don't go back. You can't watch anything we talk about or whatever.
Pretty complete still.
This is only one video. I'm trying to figure out the one video that's missing, but one is missing out of 16. So that's
pretty good.
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
Yeah, it does not usually happen because there are several deep dives that I've gone back and said, hey, yeah, you can go watch this, and it's like actually. Don't bother. It's all gone. Yeah. So you can hear us talk about stuff that you can't watch now. So if that helps, if you want to still do that, that's fine. But hopefully we entice you to go watch some Midnights, watch some Dennis Condrey, and really understand. And really, like we said, focus on his work and selling too. He was really good at like taking punches and selling and bumping all over the place. Like he's a complete worker in that sense. That he was really good at that aspect too. Now, promo wise, a decent promo, but obviously Jim Cornette brings that team up to a different level as a promo guy. But a decent enough promo to get by. Certainly not a bad promo guy, but yeah, definitely check it out. But horrible end to his life. But hopefully we did it a little bit of justice there.